I was never a particularly suspicious person. In relationships, I believed in trust and freedom. Perhaps that's why I ignored the little things for far too long. The small changes that, when put together, became a painfully obvious puzzle. We had been married for almost 5 years. We lived modestly but steadily. Work, home, the occasional weekend outing together, everything seemed normal. So normal, in fact, that sometimes I caught myself thinking we had become more like roommates than husband and wife. But I brushed that thought aside, assuming it was just part of being an adult. It all started gradually. Little shifts that, when added together, painted a much darker picture. She began staying late at work more often, blaming meetings or emergencies. Her phone had new passwords. Intimacy dwindled and sometimes disappeared for weeks. I tried to talk to her, but she brushed it off, said she was tired, that she had burned out, and I believed her, because believing was easier than digging deeper. I wasn't perfect either. I got tired too. Sometimes I drank in the evenings, came home late, worn out and drained, and would just collapse into bed. On those nights, I would turn my back to her and fall asleep quickly. Sometimes she was already in bed. Sometimes she came in later. Only once did I wake up with a strange feeling, like something wasn't right. But it was dark, and I barely opened my eyes. I saw a silhouette and immediately fell back asleep, assuming it was her. And then came the night when everything fell apart. We had a fight. Something petty. She left the balcony door open, and the apartment got cold. I snapped at her. She lashed out. She went to bed early. I stayed in the kitchen. I thought, let her cool down. I finished my glass of wine and went to bed half an hour later. As usual, I turned to face the wall, closed my eyes. I heard her whispering. I thought she was on the phone. Then I felt movement on the bed. I wanted to turn around, but right then, she placed a hand on my back, like she was checking if I was asleep. I froze, and I didn't move. My heart started pounding. I understood everything in that moment, but I still couldn't believe it. I pretended to be asleep. A few minutes passed. I could feel the mattress shifting again. Then, soft, cautious footsteps. And then, a faint smell. A scent that didn't belong to me. Someone else's cologne, and someone else's breathing. I clenched my fists but didn't turn. Not then, not yet. I just lay there, motionless, while two people right behind my back tore apart everything we had built together over the years. On my bed, in my bedroom, just inches away from me. They were sure I was asleep, that I was the drunk, passed-out husband, that it was safe to do this, bold, cruel, without fear. I heard every rustle, every sound that burned itself into my memory, and that's when I understood. It's not love that dies, it's trust. Trust dies quietly, without screaming. Just like that night. I didn't do anything. No outburst. No scene. I waited. I waited for it to be over. For him to leave. For her to lie back down. I lay there, listening to her steady breathing, and wondered what I was supposed to do with this knowledge. With this betrayal. The next morning was a test of everything I thought I knew about myself. I got up before her, as usual. I walked to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't recognize the man staring back. Something in me had cracked overnight, but there was no room for breakdowns. Not yet. She came into the kitchen like nothing had happened, hair up in a messy bun, wearing one of my old t-shirts, smiling faintly like she always did on Saturday mornings. She kissed my cheek, said, "Morning," and poured herself coffee. I sat there staring at her, trying to decide if I should confront her right then. But how do you start a conversation like that? Hey, I was pretending to sleep while you cheated on me right next to my body. Number I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I paid attention to every little move, every glance at her phone, every excuse to go run errands or meet with a friend. Now I knew what to look for. The makeup that didn't match the plan for the day, the scent that wasn't hers, the carefully muted notifications. And the worst part? She was good at hiding it. Too good. Which made me wonder how long this had actually been going on. Weeks? Months? Maybe even a year? I started sleeping later on purpose, pretending again, waiting, listening. She became more reckless. A few days later, she brought him again. Different timing, same routine. I felt like a ghost haunting my own home, watching a life I thought was mine slowly twist into something unrecognizable. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the ease with which she lived this double life. The calmness in her voice. The way she laughed with me during the day and snuck around at night. I wondered if she felt any guilt at all, or if I had simply become invisible to her. One night, I left my phone recording audio under the bed. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed proof, not for confrontation, but because I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe I had imagined it. But when I listened the next morning, I knew I hadn't. The soft rustle of clothes, whispered words, him calling her baby, her giggling, my bed creaking beneath them, my own slow breathing in the background, turned toward the wall, faking sleep. It broke something permanent inside me. But still I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I planned. I started moving things quietly. Important documents, a bit of cash, small essentials. I created a new email, looked into short-term rentals, talked to a lawyer, anonymously at first. I needed an exit plan, one that wouldn't explode into drama or chaos. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. But peace doesn't come easily when you're living a lie in your own home. And every day that passed, every minute I spent pretending around her, the hatred grew. Not for her, but for the version of myself who let it get this far. Who let himself be walked over. Who stayed silent, even when the truth was so loud it was deafening. But the end was coming, and I was going to make sure I was ready for it. I don't think she noticed, not right away at least. I became quieter, more calculated. I cooked dinner, I cleaned. I kissed her forehead when I left for work. Played the role of the loving, tired husband who was just going through the motions. But every move I made now was part of something bigger, an escape. I wasn't interested in confronting her anymore. What I wanted was to disappear so thoroughly that the silence I left behind would scream louder than any fight. Some evenings, I'd sit across the dinner table and just study her face. Her eyes would light up when she spoke about her day, but never about me, never about us. I watched her live in a world where I was background noise, just a presence to be managed and accounted for. She had built a second life in the shadows of mine, and I had been too blind to see it until I was lying next to betrayal in the dark. She had no idea I had already checked our shared accounts. No idea I'd seen the receipts. Coffee for two at places we never went together, charges for hotel rooms downtown, dates that matched the nights I remember lying awake in silence while she slipped back into bed. She was careless, because she thought I was asleep to everything, but I was wide awake now. And then came the night that changed everything again. It was almost midnight. I had been in bed pretending to sleep for about half an hour. I heard the front door unlock, not quietly, not like before. This time it was deliberate, confident. She came in with him, whispering, laughing. They thought I was dead to the world, just like always. But I wasn't. She led him straight to the bedroom, my bedroom. I heard her heels click softly on the hardwood, then the low rumble of his voice. He hesitated, asked something. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was cautious, uncertain. Maybe he was getting nervous. Maybe he felt what I did, that something wasn't quite right. She hushed him, said something soft. Her hand grazed my shoulder. "He's out cold," she said. I felt her fingers linger. He had a rough day at work. It took everything I had not to breathe differently, not to flinch. I lay there, perfectly still, as she climbed over me and kissed another man where I could hear it, feel it, less than a foot from my face. There was a moment where my mind wanted to scream, to throw off the sheets and destroy everything. But instead, I let the rage settle deep inside me, like coals burning low in a fireplace. I couldn't look. I couldn't move. I just listened. It didn't last long. 10 minutes maybe. 10 minutes that stretched out like a slow-burning fuse, every second pressing against my skull. I waited until he was gone, until the front door closed again, and her footsteps padded softly back to bed. She curled up next to me. She even sighed, one of those content little exhales she used to do when she still loved me. And that night, I didn't sleep. I stared into the dark and decided it would be the last time she ever got to lie beside me like that. The next day, I left for work as usual, but I didn't go to the office. Instead, I went to a lawyer I had contacted anonymously the week before. We talked options, separation, divorce, protecting assets. I learned what I needed, got the documents prepared. My name, printed clearly at the top, already felt foreign to me, like someone else's life on paper. But I wasn't ready to hand them over. Not yet. Because I wanted her to feel something first. I started dropping hints, subtle changes. I stopped reacting the way she expected. I stayed out late, came home smelling like nothing she could recognize. I was polite but cold, friendly but unreachable. I gave her the very same ghost she had been giving me for months, and I could tell it rattled her. She started asking questions. Where had I been? Why wasn't I talking as much? Was I okay? I smiled, said I was fine. That work had just been stressful, that I was tired, just tired, and she believed me, the way I had believed her. It was almost poetic, how roles reversed so quietly. But this wasn't revenge. This was a controlled demolition. And every brick of the life we'd built was about to fall on my terms. Days turned into weeks. She began to notice the distance. At first, she tried to ignore it, busying herself with chores, talking more than usual about random things, faking laughter that once came easily. But I wasn't reacting. I wasn't playing the role anymore. The mask of the loving husband had slipped just enough for her to start feeling it, that cold, creeping doubt. Something had changed, and she couldn't explain it. I could see it in her eyes. At dinner, her gaze lingered longer than it used to. She asked me questions she hadn't bothered with in years. Are you happy? Is something wrong? I feel like you're somewhere else lately. And I gave her the same empty words she used to feed me. I'm just tired. Everything's fine. We're okay. But we weren't. The truth was, I had become obsessed. Not with her, not with the man she brought into our bed, but with the unraveling itself. The psychology of betrayal fascinated and horrified me. I'd spend hours reading stories of infidelity, watching videos, listening to confessions, trying to understand why someone could destroy something sacred so easily and what came after for the ones left behind. I wasn't looking for closure. I was preparing for detonation. It was strange how calm I became, even serene, like I'd accepted the death of something and was simply waiting for the funeral. But beneath that calm, there was still rot, the kind that eats at you slowly, methodically. I smiled less, laughed never. My eyes felt heavier, my chest tighter. Even my voice sounded different in my own head. And yet, she still didn't see the full picture. She noticed enough to start getting nervous. One night I came home and she had cooked dinner, an actual meal, not just leftovers or microwave food. She was dressed in something she hadn't worn in years, makeup, perfume. She even lit candles, played soft music, the same kind we used to dance to on weekends long ago. She poured wine, and we sat down. Her hands were trembling. "I miss us," she said softly, reaching across the table. "I don't know what's happening, but I feel like I'm losing you. Please talk to me." The irony made me want to laugh or scream. She felt like she was losing me. I looked at her, really looked, her eyes wide and wet, her fingers curling in nervous rhythm, her lips trembling, full of lies. And I almost believed the act. Almost. But then I remembered her whispering to another man in the dark, kissing him inches from my face, and the warmth I might have felt evaporated instantly. So I smiled, told her I loved her, that I was just tired, that maybe we needed a vacation, some time away. I even suggested we go to that cabin we used to talk about, the one near the lake where phones don't work and the silence is thick like fog. Her eyes lit up. She nodded quickly, grateful, hopeful. She still didn't see it coming, but that trip would be the last thing we ever did as husband and wife. In the days leading up to it, I planned everything meticulously. Booked the place, arranged time off, told my boss I was taking a personal break and might not have cell signal. I even packed her favorite snacks, favorite wine. I wanted everything to feel perfect, like the calm before a storm that levels an entire coastline. When we left that Friday morning, she clung to me in the car, rested her head on my shoulder during the drive, laughed, played with the radio. It felt like a scene from a life I no longer lived, like watching someone else's home video. By the time we reached the cabin, she was glowing. She walked barefoot through the wooden floors, smiling at everything like a child seeing snow for the first time. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, pulling me into a long hug. "Thank you for doing this." And I hugged her back, but my eyes were open. That night, as she lay beside me in the unfamiliar bed, I couldn't sleep. Not from anger, not even from pain, but from the sheer weight of what I knew I was about to do. I got out of bed quietly, stepped outside, and sat on the porch. The air was cold. The trees didn't move. The stars above felt impossibly bright and distant. I sat there for an hour, maybe more, thinking about the final moment, how I would tell her, when, and with what words. Would I show her proof? Would I scream? Would I walk away in silence? Part of me wanted to burn it all down in a blaze of truth and fury. But another part, the one that had been growing slowly inside me, wanted peace, wanted to let her collapse under the weight of her own guilt, without giving her the satisfaction of a confrontation. When I finally went back inside, She stirred, then turned to me with a sleepy smile. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. Just needed some air. She reached for me in the dark, and I let her. One last time. The morning after, everything looked peaceful. The light filtered in through the cabin windows like nothing was wrong in the world. Birds chirped, coffee brewed, and my wife moved through the little kitchen, humming to herself, barefoot and light. She made pancakes, just like she used to when we were happy. She kissed my cheek, told me how good she felt here, how we should do this more often. I smiled, told her I agreed, played my role to perfection. Inside, though, I was folding in on myself. That night before, when she reached for me, touched me like nothing was broken, was the final nail. I let it happen, not because I wanted her, but because I needed to know. Needed to see how far she could go pretending we were still whole. She passed the test. She could lie with her body as easily as with her mouth. We spent the day walking by the lake, taking pictures. She laughed more than I had heard in months. Said things like, "This reminds me of the early days," and "I forgot how good we are together." I wanted to vomit. It was almost funny, how betrayal makes you two people at once, outwardly composed, engaged, inwardly calculating every breath, every movement, every lie. I wasn't really with her that day. I was observing, taking mental notes, watching how she behaved when she thought she had won me back, and she had no idea that the ground under her was already crumbling. That night, after dinner, I opened a bottle of wine. We sat by the fireplace. She curled up next to me like old times, eyes half-lidded with contentment. And when I offered a toast, she lifted her glass eagerly. "To second chances," I said softly. She smiled, clinked her glass against mine. "To us." We drank, and I watched her swallow the lie. After she fell asleep, I stayed up late, scrolling through my phone, reading messages I had saved, pictures she didn't know I had, call logs that told their own story. I had built a quiet archive, evidence not just of the affair, but of her nature, her patterns, her strategies. I wasn't gathering it to confront her. I wasn't going to scream or demand apologies. I was beyond that now. What I was doing was documenting the end, not to expose her to the world, but to remind myself that I wasn't insane, that the gut feeling I ignored for so long had been real, that every sleepless night, every twist in my chest, every moment of numb silence, it had all meant something. The next morning, we packed up. The drive home was quieter. She must have sensed something, because she grew a little tense, kept looking at me, like trying to read my thoughts. Back in the city, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. We returned to the same bed, the same apartment, the same life. But I had changed. I started working later, staying out longer. She noticed. Asked if everything was all right. I told her yes. Sometimes I pretended to be asleep before she got into bed. Other times I stayed up and stared blankly at the TV while she silently folded laundry or scrolled through her phone. We became ghosts in our own home. I knew she was still seeing him. The signs were there. New lingerie hidden deep in drawers, discreet perfume changes, nights she claimed she was with coworkers but came home with flushed cheeks and half-done makeup. But I no longer cared to catch her. That wasn't the point anymore. I was preparing to disappear, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Every day I untied one more knot that bound me to her. I began imagining life after her, where I would live, who I would be. how I would feel once I no longer had to pretend. There was a day, 2 weeks after the cabin trip, when she came home looking scared, pale. She sat down beside me, her hands shaking. "I need to tell you something," she said. I didn't respond, just waited. She hesitated, looked down. "There's someone else," she finally whispered. I looked at her, expressionless, not surprised, not even angry. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she added quickly. "It just did, and I didn't know how to stop." The silence between us was louder than anything she had said. "I haven't seen him in a while," she lied. I ended it. I nodded. She looked confused. "Aren't you going to say something?" I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water, took a long sip. Then I said, "Thanks for telling me." That was it. She stared at me like I had grown a second head. She expected yelling, a breakdown, maybe a fight. But I was too far gone for drama. That night she cried in the bedroom. I stayed in the living room. The next morning, she tried to act like things could be repaired, that her confession had somehow cleared the slate. But all it did was confirm what I already knew. She thought coming clean would heal us. But the wound was already infected, and soon I would decide how to cut it out entirely. In the days that followed her confession, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was guilt or fear of losing control, but she began to act as though nothing had happened. Like her honesty had granted her some moral reset, and now we could begin again. She cooked more often, laughed too loudly, touched me more, a hand on my arm, a kiss on the cheek, the occasional attempt to rekindle intimacy. But it all felt staged, desperate, like someone trying to tape together a shattered mirror, pretending they didn't notice their reflection was in pieces. I played along, not because I believed in reconciliation, but because I needed time. I still wasn't sure how I wanted to end it. Divorce was an obvious option, but something about a clean break felt too kind, too simple. She had destroyed years of loyalty with a smirk and a lie. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, the cold, the confusion, the helplessness of watching someone you love vanish in plain sight. One night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered. The screen lit up, a notification from a chat app she swore she didn't use anymore. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew who it was from, and what it said didn't matter. The fact that he still existed in our life, that was the final nail. I started making arrangements, quietly, renting a small apartment across town under a different name, transferring money to a private account, organizing important documents. I moved like a shadow, invisible and efficient. During the day, I was her husband. At night, I became someone else, someone packing up his life one drawer at a time. One Saturday morning, I told her I needed to visit my parents for a few days. She barely looked up from her coffee, just said, "Okay, give them my love." She didn't ask why I was bringing a suitcase. I left the house, drove 2 blocks, then doubled back and parked a street away. I watched from a distance as, 30 minutes later, a man let himself into our home with a key I didn't know she had given away. I watched the curtains move, the lights shift. I felt nothing. No rage, no pain, just clarity. That was the last time I saw her in person. The next morning, she received a letter. I knew exactly when it arrived. I had timed it with precision. Inside was a printed copy of our marriage certificate, a list of her infidelities as documented by me, and a simple note. I was awake, every time. Goodbye. I never went back. Friends were confused. Some were sympathetic. Others accused me of being heartless. I didn't respond to any of it. The people who mattered would understand eventually. The rest, well, they were never really on my side. She tried to reach me, of course. Dozens of texts, voicemails that ranged from desperate apologies to furious rants. At one point, she even came to my new apartment. I watched her from behind the curtains, her figure small and unfamiliar on the street. She looked up, eyes scanning the building, as if trying to sense where I might be. She didn't find me. I never answered. She eventually stopped trying. The new place was quiet, sparse, but it was mine. There were no ghosts here, no creaking floorboards carrying whispered lies. I bought a new bed, new sheets, a cheap coffee machine, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night. But freedom, I learned, doesn't feel like fireworks or victory laps. It feels like silence, like waking up and not checking your phone for betrayal, like making breakfast and eating it in peace. Some nights, the memories creep in, soft, uninvited. I remember her laugh, the smell of her shampoo, the way she used to dance barefoot in the kitchen when she thought I wasn't looking. Those moments are cruel, not because they were fake, but because they were real, and still weren't enough. She had everything, and she threw it away. I'm not bitter, not anymore. Bitterness is a tether, and I've cut everyone. I still believe in love, I still believe in trust, but next time, I won't close my eyes to keep the peace. I won't turn away from red flags just because they're wrapped in warmth. Some lessons you only learn by lying awake in the dark, listening to betrayal breathe beside you, and I've learned mine. Healing, if you can call it that, doesn't follow a straight line. Some mornings, I would wake up feeling weightless, like I had finally put everything behind me. Then, without warning, a smell, a sound, a place would pull me back into the past, like a hook under the skin. It wasn't grief I felt, not anymore. It was something more subtle, like residue, the echo of a life that could have been. I started spending time alone, not out of loneliness, but out of necessity. I needed to learn how to exist without apology, without the constant second-guessing that years of betrayal had drilled into me. I found new rituals, mornings at a quiet cafe, long walks through the park with no destination. I even joined a small photography class, something I had always talked about doing but never had time for. There, I learned how to see the world again, not just look at it. I studied light, shadows, timing. For the first time in years, I started to notice things. The way sunlight touched the tops of buildings in the early morning, or how strangers smiled to themselves when they thought no one was watching. I started taking photos of the ordinary, the forgotten, the beautiful chaos of daily life. It wasn't therapy, not in the traditional sense, but it helped. Every frame captured was a reminder that I still had perspective, that I could still create something, even out of silence. One afternoon, during a walk through a busy plaza, I saw a couple sitting on a bench. They weren't talking, they weren't even touching, but there was something in the way they sat, the space between them, the ease of their stillness, that said everything. I snapped a picture, and that's when I realized something. I had stopped envying other people. I no longer looked at couples and felt bitterness claw at my insides. I didn't imagine what it would be like to go back, to try again with someone else. I was just present, watching the world, not needing to be part of it all the time. But life, as always, has its way of testing you. Months passed. seasons turned. And then one rainy evening, as I left a bookstore with a new novel in hand, I heard someone call my name. It was her. She stood under the awning of a shop across the street, umbrella in hand, soaked at the edges. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. My heart didn't race. My legs didn't freeze. I just blinked. She crossed the street without waiting for traffic. Same smile, same eyes, but something was different now. Maybe it was me. "I didn't know if I'd ever run into you again," she said. Her voice was softer, controlled. "I moved across town," I answered simply. "Didn't think I'd run into you either." There was a long pause, one of those silences filled with everything that didn't need to be said. "I'm not here to beg," she said finally. I think about you. I wanted you to know that." I nodded. "Thanks. I've changed," she said, eyes searching mine. "People always do," I said. "Question is, into what?" She didn't answer. We stood there for a moment, strangers in a familiar storm. I could tell she wanted more from the moment. Closure, maybe, or forgiveness. But I had already given myself that. "You look good," she said, almost as an afterthought. "I feel good," I replied. "Hope you do too." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I try." Then she turned, stepped back into the rain, and was gone. I stood there for a while, not because I was shaken, but because I realized something vital. I felt nothing. No anger, no nostalgia, just peace. And in that peace, a kind of quiet triumph. There is freedom in indifference. Not the bitter kind, the kind that comes when you've mourned every version of a future that will never happen, and survived it. That night, I developed a new roll of film. Among the shots was the couple on the bench, still frozen in their perfect silence. I pinned it to the wall above my desk, not as a reminder of love, but of stillness, of calm, of how sometimes the best part of a story is that it's over.